It was toward the end of his life, in the 4th century before the birth of Christ, that Plato set down in writing the story of Atlantis, the only written account of it in all of antiquity. According to him, the account is fact, not fiction.
I've been reading this book. It's about a dinner party, a symposium. And the author is Plato, but Plato is not a major character here in the symposium. It's his mentor, Socrates. Socrates is the guy who took hemlock. You'll probably remember him. In any event, this is a book about people that we know actually existed, all except one of them. There's a character by the name of Timaeus, and Timaeus we have no historical record of. But Critias was Plato's great-grandfather, and Critias also plays a major role here. The discussion of Atlantis starts with Timaeus, but actually it's Critias that tells us the most about it. Now, Critias didn't hear this story himself personally. He got it from his grandfather, who, confusingly enough, was also named Critias. And Critias didn't hear it himself either. He got it from his father, Dropides. Now, Dropides didn't hear it directly exactly. He heard it from Solon, who had gotten it from some Egyptians. Solon was at a dinner party, much like the symposium that the book is about, and he was talking to Dropides about the story that he heard in Egypt about Atlantis. Now, the Egyptians were telling Solon this story because Solon had been bragging about Greek history, and the Egyptians just couldn't stand it, so they were really going to put him down. So they told him the story about Atlantis. They may have just made it up. In any event, the story of Atlantis goes back 9,000 years. So the chances of the Egyptians getting the story exactly right seem difficult. Not only that, you have the problem of the translation between the Egyptians and the Greeks. The Egyptians may not have understood Greek very well, and Solon probably didn't understand Egyptian at all. So there could be something lost in translation. And then, of course, there's the fact that Solon tells it at a dinner party. Dropides hears it, passes it along to his grandson, and he passes it along to his great-grandson, who tells Socrates about it, and even that is recorded by Plato. So there's lots of different places where this story could have fallen through the cracks. Nonetheless, it's here in Athens that the story starts, because that's where the symposium, the dinner party, is.
Now we're going to make an assumption that Plato didn't make up this story. The Egyptians didn't make up this story. This story of Atlantis actually happened sometime in the distant past, and that information about it was transmitted through all these generations without any error or loss. Of course, I can't read Greek. But fortunately, on the right-hand side of the page, there's an English translation of the Greek. And we're going to go through the Critias, and we're going to mark out all of the important facts about Atlantis and see if we can locate it. Atlantis is described in about 25 pages. And in that 25 pages, there are a number of key elements that will help you to locate where Atlantis was, if it was ever anywhere. On this page, we learn that the demise of Atlantis occurred 9,000 years before the time of Solon. That would make it between 11 and 12,000 years back from the present. We also learned that it is beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and I'm going to get back to that in a second. We also learn that it's larger than Libya and Asia combined. Now, that's less helpful than you would think, because Libya and Asia have been of variable size over a period of time. We also learn that there's been a barrier of impassable mud. That barrier of impassable mud that the ships couldn't go through, that could actually be something other than mud. It could be pumice, which floats. If there had been a volcano go off, it could have left a barrier of pumice on the sea that the ships couldn't go through.
According to the Egyptians, the continent lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, thought to be the Straits of Gibraltar. This was the gateway to the Atlantic Ocean, a place the Greeks had only heard about.
Now, the Pillars of Hercules are generally reckoned, and they were in ancient times, to have been the Straits of Gibraltar. The Straits of Gibraltar is the modern term. Ever since the Moors invaded Spain, it's been called Gibraltar. That is actually an Arabic term that's been transliterated into English and other European languages. The term the Pillars of Hercules could actually apply to a couple of other different places in the Mediterranean in at least very ancient times. It could very well be that the Pillars of Hercules that's referred to in the Atlantis legend was actually the Straits of Messina, in between Sicily and Italy, which is going to appear on the left-hand side. Or it could be the Bosphorus, which leads from the Mediterranean into the Black Sea, and that appears on the right-hand side. In any event, my point is that the Straits of Gibraltar and the Pillars of Hercules may not necessarily be the same thing. It could very well be other choke points as well. Other things we know about Atlantis is that it produced aurichalcum. Now, nobody knows what that stuff was. They say that it was the most precious metal except for gold. The only candidate that I know of is electrum, which is a combination of gold and silver. It could have been that. But the island also had timber, and it had a very large stock of elephants as well. Apparently, the island was quite lush.
He puts in elephants. In fact, it's only the second time that they're mentioned in Greek literature when Plato describes Atlantis.
This island city was described as being laid out in a series of concentric circles of land and water, each one connected to the ocean by an immense canal 100 feet deep.
Further along, Plato records how Atlantis was actually a series of land and sea circles. And of course, what he's talking about here is really not the continent of Atlantis, but the capital city, and how they opened up channels to get from the main part of the city out to the open sea. The Critias recounts not only how many circles of land and sea there were in the capital, but also what the width of those circles happened to be. And if you count them all up, it's less than, or just about, 3 miles in diameter. For construction materials, the Atlanteans often used red and black and white blocks of stone. Now, the reason for this appears to be because those were the colors of stone that were most common in Atlantis. Remember, the red and black and white stone blocks were coming back to them. One of the things that Plato tells us about Atlantis is that the land is full of red and white and black rocks. But where are you going to find such a place that has red and white and black blocks, stone blocks, all in the same place? Plato further recounts that the central island had two different kinds of springs, one being cold and one being warm water. This suggests that there was a volcanic element someplace in that island. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been that warm water. To the north, the continent of Atlantis had mountains, but then there was a plain, and that plain was 60,000 square miles. And the area was full of people, apparently. If you take a look at the calculations for the size of the Army and Navy that they could field, you come up with a number of nearly 200,000 men, soldiers and sailors combined. In ancient times, countries could field an army roughly 10% of their total population. That suggests the total population of Atlantis must have been about 2 million. Finally, Atlantis seems to have been involved in the worship of bulls to some extent, or at least bulls were involved in their religion in some particular manner. As I counted, this makes about 17 different elements that you can look at to tell whether or not a particular place happens to be Atlantis.
Atlantis was dominated by a vast, almost perfectly rectangular plain, surrounded on three sides by high, very beautiful mountains. Possessed of abundant natural resources, rare plants and precious flowers of every description, even elephants and other exotic animals, Atlantis was a land like no other, where the people wanted for nothing.
Because of the size description of Atlantis, the fact that it is outside the Pillars of Hercules, and the fact that it had elephants, traditionally many cartographers had located it either just outside North Africa or just beyond Spain. Now for the moment, let us focus on the bull-worshipping aspect of the Atlanteans. We know of another culture in the Mediterranean that also worshipped bulls. It was the Minoan culture. So let us go back and take a look at the myth of Minos.